They used to call me the Hawk of Justice. That name, it used to make people lower their gaze, made even the powerful watch their step. But that was 30 years ago. Now, I'm just an old man with gray hair, living quietly with my son and granddaughter in a small house on the outskirts of town, where the sound of birds in the morning has replaced the tense sessions in the courtroom. People think I'm dead, or at least forgotten. Maybe they're right. But what they don't know is that justice can sleep, but it never dies. It just rests in a father's heart, waiting for the day it's called to wake up. The morning in my house always starts with the smell of brewing coffee and the murmur of local news on the old radio. I'm usually up before Michael, my only son. At 68, sleep doesn't come easy anymore. A simple gust of wind is enough to make me open my eyes. I like that moment at dawn, when the light creeps through the wooden window frame, sweeping across the mantel where my wife Lucy's picture sits. Her eyes in the photo are still as tender as ever. But time isn't tender with anyone. Michael is a civil engineer, a good, hard-working man. I often see myself in him, in the way he works quietly, enduring more than he complains about. Maybe that's why, between father and son, there have never been many words. Men's affection is sometimes measured in silence, not sweet talk. Every now and then, when Sophie, my 7-year-old granddaughter, comes running into the kitchen, she'll hug my legs and say, "Grandpa, coffee?" I just smile. She's the little light of this house, the reason these quiet walls still hold any warmth. Lucy used to say, "Old folks only really live when someone still needs them." That saying gets truer every day. I spend most of my time reading, tending to the orchids in the backyard, and sometimes helping Michael with the books for his job site. A life this simple and peaceful. It's enough to make a man think he's settled all his debts with the world, but tranquility is usually just fate's mask. And fate, like an old debt collector, always knows the right time to come knocking. That night, as the yellow light spilled onto the dining room table, I heard the phone ring, insistent, urgent. Michael had just left for the site for a late shift, and I was used to him not calling home unless it was serious. I picked up the receiver. The voice on the other end was trembling. "Mr. Vance, I'm so sorry. There's been an accident at the site." I froze. The world around me seemed to stop. All the sounds faded away, leaving only the pounding of my own heart. When I got to the hospital, the smell of disinfectant and the sound of gurneys bumping against the walls echoed heavily. Michael was lying in the bed, his face pale. The doctor was brief, like he was reading a sentence. "He's not going to walk normally again." I don't remember how I responded. I just remember my hand gripping my son's, cold, weak, and helpless. In his eyes, I saw my own reflection from years ago, a man who had just lost everything, with nothing but a silence hard as rock in his chest. And I didn't know that in that exact instant, justice, the old hawk, was beginning to spread its wings again. Before we continue, subscribe to the channel and let us know where you're listening from in the comments below. In the days after the accident, our house became too quiet. You no longer heard Michael's laughter playing with Sophie or the hammering sounds he'd sometimes bring home from the site. Now there was only the tap of a crutch on the floor, slow and heavy like a tired heartbeat. Michael still tried to act strong, saying he'd get used to it, but I knew that inside, he was falling apart. His whole life, my son had built a steady footing for himself, at work, for his family, and in his own self-worth. Now, all that was left was a cane and a shadow hanging over his future. Carla, his wife, changed faster than Michael's wound. The first few days, she cried and held her husband, saying they'd get through it together. But after a few weeks, the tears dried up and her absences became more frequent. I didn't need to ask to know where she was going. A strange perfume, a new coat, and a look in her eye that didn't belong to this house anymore. One afternoon, while I was cleaning the kitchen, Sophie gently tugged on my hand. "Grandpa, Mom says she's not coming home for dinner again." "Is your mom working?" "No, she says she's going to see a friend. I don't know who." I nodded, trying to smile so the girl wouldn't worry. But inside me, something felt heavy as a stone. That night, Michael sat at the table for a long time without saying a word. I poured him a cup of tea, but he just stared into the distance. Dad, I think she's tired of me. I didn't answer. A man who says that usually doesn't need advice because he already knows the answer. 3 days later, Carla came home late, her face carefully made up, her tone strangely cold. Michael, I need to talk to you. I got up to leave, but he stopped me. It's okay, Dad. Stay. Carla put a stack of papers on the table. I want a divorce. We can't go on like this. You need a caretaker, and I have a right to live my life, too. Michael gripped the armrests of his wheelchair tightly and said in a low voice, And who is your life? What man? Carla smirked. Don't make me answer questions you don't want to hear. I tried to keep my voice calm. And Sophie? I'm fighting for custody, of course. A disabled man can't raise a daughter. Her words were like a knife straight to my heart. Michael went rigid. His lips trembled. I stared at Carla for a long time. And as she turned to leave, I said slowly, each word landing heavy as a stone, You have no idea what you just stepped into. I didn't sleep that night. I opened an old drawer and pulled out a dusty wooden box. Inside was the small wooden gavel I used to use when I was a judge. The handle was worn, and on the head of the gavel, the phrase Veritas ante omnia was engraved, truth above all. I held it in my hands for a long time, and for the first time in 30 years, I felt that familiar sensation again, the weight not just of the wood, but of justice. Outside, the wind picked up. The leaves in the trees whispered as if to say, It's time, Ernest. I knew I couldn't stand by any longer. The next morning, sunlight filtered through the curtains, but in my heart, there was only darkness. Michael barely spoke during breakfast. He tried a few spoonfuls of oatmeal and put the spoon back down. I didn't blame him. A man who loses his ability to walk and is about to lose his family. What balance does he have left? Carla had left with her things early. I heard the rolling of suitcases on the floor, the slam of the door that sounded like a verdict. Sophie was sitting on the stairs, her eyes full of tears. I took her in my arms. Grandpa, is Mom coming back? She asked. I looked at the door and answered in a very low voice. She'll be back, but not like before, sweetheart. That afternoon, I sat in my small study, which was still full of memories from my time as a judge, some old law books, yellowed case files, and the wooden gavel that was still on the shelf. I took it down, dusted it off, and placed it on the desk. Under the dim yellow light, the faded engraved letters on the handle appeared like scars from the past. Veritas ante omnia. I once believed in that phrase more than anything in the world, until the day justice was bought with money and my honor was buried by a false ruling. Michael knocked on the door and came in, leaning on his crutches. Dad, is it true we have to sell the house? I looked at my son and saw the fear in his eyes of someone about to lose his last refuge. No, son. No one can take this house from you. But Carla's lawyer says the house is marital property. I cut him off. Her lawyer only knows the law. I, on the other hand, know justice. Michael was silent. I pulled a chair over for him, motioning for him to sit. Do you know why I resigned 30 years ago? The Costello case, right? I heard they disbarred you. I sighed, the bitterness still there despite the time that had passed. I wasn't disbarred. I walked away, because if I had stayed, I would have had to sign a judgment acquitting a man I knew was guilty. Costello had money, power, and friends in the courthouse. Since I wouldn't bend, they called me the rebel, the old hawk who didn't know how to bow his head. Michael looked at me, a mix of shock and pain in his eyes. I never knew. You weren't supposed to. I chose silence. I thought silence would keep you safe. But now I realize that silence is also a form of guilt. I stood up. I took the wooden gavel and placed it in my son's hands. You built this house with your own 2 hands. I will protect it with the hands that once upheld justice. Michael looked at me, and for the first time in weeks, his trembling lips managed a small smile. Then I trust you, Dad. When he left the room, I opened the closet and pulled out an old leather briefcase. Inside, there were still some copies of old files and my federal judge's credentials, now yellowed. I looked at it for a long time and then said quietly to myself, Ernest Vance may be old, but the hawk of justice isn't dead yet. I put Lucy's picture back on the desk. Her gaze in the photo seemed to follow me. My dear, it looks like I'm about to walk into another storm. But this time, I'm not doing it for my honor. I'm doing it for our son's future. Outside, it began to rain softly. I heard the rain tapping on the old shingles, like the slow gavel strike from long ago, reminding me that sometimes justice needs to be woken up by the same hand that once held it. On Monday morning, after Carla had gone, the doorbell rang. A man in a gray suit, leather briefcase in hand, smiled coldly. "Hello, I'm Mr. Reynolds. I represent Mrs. Carla Anderson. We need to discuss the divorce and the division of assets." I looked him straight in the eye, my gaze calm but cold. Michael, trembling, came out of the living room on his crutches. My son's face was drawn, but his eyes were full of pain. I knew he wasn't ready for this confrontation. Reynolds opened his briefcase and took out a stack of papers. According to current marital law, this house, regardless of whose name is on the deed, is considered community property, as both parties used and improved it during the marriage. Mrs. Anderson is entitled to request its sale to divide the value. I managed a slight smile, my voice still soft. "That's a shame, counselor. But you're talking about the law, and I'm talking about the truth. This house was purchased 3 years before Michael got married, with his own savings. I have all the documents and the original contract." Reynolds raised an eyebrow. "Then why does Mrs. Anderson claim she has proof of her financial contribution?" I answered dryly. "Then let her prove it." The tension in the room grew thick. Michael sat there, silent, his hands gripping the handles of his crutches. When the lawyer left, he said quietly, "Dad, I'm afraid I don't have the strength for this fight." I put my hand on his shoulder. "You just need to stand firm. Leave the rest to me." That night, I started gathering everything related to the house, the sales contract, the receipts for materials, a copy of the building permit. I was used to organizing evidence. The old trade had never really left me. I had just hidden it for too long. While searching, I stumbled across an older file, Costello v. The State, 1993. I paused. That name was still like a scar that hadn't healed. I clearly remembered the last night before I left the bench. A man in a dark suit appeared at my door and threw an envelope on the porch. Inside was a photo of a young Michael walking to school with a note. "If you don't back down, the boy disappears." I thought that time was past, but thinking of Carla, the woman trying to take Michael's house, and whoever was behind her, my instincts woke up. This whole thing smelled of another hand, one more sophisticated and familiar. Michael came in and saw me still sitting among the pile of papers. "Still awake, Dad?" "There are some battles that can't be fought in the daylight, son." I closed the file and organized everything. "Tomorrow we file the official response. I want to go to the courthouse with you myself." "Dad, can you still practice law?" I smiled bitterly. "I don't need to be a lawyer. I just need to be a father, and a father has a better memory than any law." That night, I went out on the porch and sat watching the rain. The wind was blowing hard, filling the yard with fallen leaves. Every drop of water that hit the roof sounded like the rhythm of a distant gavel. I knew I had crossed the line between peace and the storm, and there was no turning back. In the darkness, I said quietly to myself, "Carla, you don't know who you're playing with." Then I raised my coffee cup and took a bitter sip. In that bitterness, I tasted the familiar tang of something resurfacing. Justice. The next morning, I took Michael to the hospital for his checkup. The doctor said his leg would need many more months of therapy before it could support him. Michael just nodded, showing no reaction. He had learned to be silent in the face of despair. I knew that look well, the look of a man who feels he no longer deserves what he once had. On the way home, he asked quietly, "Dad, do you regret it? Leaving the bench when you still had your prestige?" I was silent for a few seconds. Regret? Yes, but not for leaving the profession, for believing that leaving was the way to protect my son. "I did it for you, Michael, because back then, someone wanted to use you as leverage." He froze, his eyes wide. "Leverage? What are you talking about?" I sighed, my old hands gripping the steering wheel. "This story, I've never told anyone." We pulled the car over on the side of the road, where a line of tall oak trees cast a shadow. I began to tell him, not with the voice of a judge, but with that of a father who had buried his past for 30 years. When I was a judge, I was handling a major case, Costello vs. the state. Costello was a wealthy businessman, ran dozens of construction companies. But behind it all, he was a money launderer, bribing officials, corrupting the whole justice system. I tried to convict him, but he had money and friends in the shadows. One night I received an envelope. Inside was a photo of you. You were only 8 years old. They threatened to hurt you if I didn't stop. Michael was speechless. Dad, I didn't know. You weren't supposed to. I left the bench so you could live in peace, but I kept a copy of the file, the real evidence. You still have it? I nodded, my gaze lost in the distance. There are some things you can't burn, son, because one day, justice will need them. Michael sighed. His trembling hand rested on mine. I understand now. Thank you, Dad, for choosing me. I smiled, one of the rare smiles of an old man who knows he's just been forgiven by his son. That night, I took out the old leather briefcase, opened it, and reviewed every paper, every old photo. Time had yellowed them, but the names they contained still shined like the undulled edge of a knife. Frank Costello, Marcus Gallo, Arthur Cole. I stopped at the last name. Arthur, my old student, the one who once promised, "I'm going to go further than you, Professor." And he had. By kneeling to power. Now he was a judge, and by a twist of fate, he was the one presiding over my son's divorce case. I smiled slightly, not knowing if it was from irony or bitterness. Life has strange circles. You think you've escaped, but really, you're just back at the starting line. I put the file away, closed the briefcase, and said quietly into the darkness, "If fate has called on me one more time, I will answer." Outside, the wind whistled through the orchids. I felt it clearly. This quiet sky was only temporary. A storm was coming. From that day on, I stopped being the quiet old man who made coffee and watered the orchids every morning. I returned to my desk, spreading out dozens of papers, receipts, contracts for the house, photographs, everything that could prove this house was Michael's blood, sweat, and tears before he ever got married. The small room now smelled of old paper, ink, and bitter coffee, just like in the years when I lived in the world of the law. Michael watched me work all morning and then said, "Dad, I'm afraid I don't have the strength to go to trial. I don't know anything about the law." I looked up, squinting at my son. "You don't need to know the law. You just need to know the truth is on your side. The law is just a language. Justice is the soul. I'll speak that language for you." I began to write the official response for the court. The pen trembled with the rhythm of my aging hand, but every word appeared clear and firm, like the strike of my old gavel. In every line, I heard my wife Lucy's voice again, as if she were still beside me, reminding me to keep faith in what's right. Around noon, I got a call from Richard Novak, an old friend, an honest prosecutor who was demoted after the Costello case. "Ernest, I heard you're going to court. Are you sure you want to step back in there?" "I don't have a choice, Richard. This time it's not for my honor, it's for my son. But don't forget, the man from back then is still alive. Marcus Gallo never really disappeared. I hear he still has influence in the construction sector." Hearing that, my heart pounded. A piece of the puzzle had just clicked into place. Gallo, Costello's right-hand man, was now Carla's protector. I was silent for a few seconds, then said, "If he's really behind this, then good. It's about time justice collected its debts." In the afternoon, Carla sent an official request for the division of assets. Attached was a psychological certificate stating that Michael was severely depressed, with signs of being unable to care for a child. I read it, and my blood boiled. The name of the doctor who signed it was Dr. Frederick Gallo. I remembered that last name very well. It was Marcus's family name. Michael looked at me, his voice trembling. "They want to take everything from me, even my daughter." "They won't, son. I've been silent for 30 years, but not this time." I took out my old credentials, Ernest Vance, federal judge, United States, now with faded letters and worn edges. I placed it on the desk, next to Lucy's picture. She used to say, "There are battles you must fight, even if you know you'll lose, because if you don't, your soul will never find peace. That night, I wrote nonstop. In front of me, a pile of documents. At my back, a family photo. Under the yellow light, my shadow was cast on the wall. It was no longer that of a tired old man, but the silhouette of the Hawk of Justice who was returning. When dawn broke, I folded the file and sighed. Justice had an appointment tomorrow, and I, though old, would be on time. That morning the sky was gray and dull, the air humid and thick as if warning of a storm. I got up earlier than usual, ironing the white shirt and the old suit I used to wear as a judge. It had faded with the years, but just touching the fabric, I felt myself return to the time when I stood in the middle of the court, my voice echoing in absolute silence. Michael struggled with his crutches, trying to button his shirt. I went over to help him, my hand trembling but firm. "Dad, I'm afraid I can't handle it." "No, son. You just have to stand tall, even if you're leaning on me. Today we're not going to court to ask for pity. We're going to demand what is just." Sophie ran to me. She hugged my legs and whispered, "Grandpa, when you bang the gavel, are you going to say, 'Order in the court'?" I chuckled. "No, this time I won't be banging the gavel. I'll just be speaking from the heart." We left the house. That Saturday, in the old streets in front of the city courthouse, a crowd of people, impeccable suits, cold faces, and curious stares at an old man helping his disabled son inside. I felt Carla's disdainful look. She was standing next to her lawyer, Reynolds, a confident smile on her lips. Next to her was another man, a stranger, tall, in a black suit and cold eyes. With just one look, I knew what kind of man he was. When we entered, the courtroom was ready. I felt my heart beat slow and strong. Sophie sat next to me, her small hands gripping the edge of my jacket, her eyes wide. She looked around, bewildered by the adult saying words she didn't understand. I put my hand on her shoulder and whispered, "Don't be afraid. Justice never shouts. It just speaks softly." And then the door at the front opened. A clerk's voice echoed, "The court is now in session for the case of divorce and property dispute between Mrs. Carla Anderson and Mr. Michael Vance." I looked up, and my heart sank. The man who had just taken his seat on the judge's bench, gray-haired, face familiar, was Judge Arthur Cole. My old student. When our eyes met, time seemed to stop. The entire room fell silent. Arthur was stunned. The pen he was holding fell from his hand onto the desk. "My God, Professor Vance, what are you doing here?" I stood up, adjusted my collar, and answered in a deep, firm voice, "I'm here to protect my son, Arthur." A murmur went through the courtroom. Carla raised an eyebrow and turned to her lawyer, a look of confusion on her face. I kept my gaze fixed on Arthur. In that moment, I saw a mix of fear, regret, and memory in his eyes. Arthur tapped the gavel lightly, trying to regain his composure. "This session is recessed for 10 minutes. He stood up and quickly left through a side door, leaving the entire room in a low chaos. I sat down, and hundreds of memories flooded back. The day he was a young student, passionate about justice, swearing he would never let power blind him. And now, he was the one holding the gavel that would decide my son's fate. Michael asked quietly, "Dad, who is he?" "Someone who once believed in justice, but lost it." Sophie rested her head on my shoulder and whispered, "Grandpa, why is everyone sad?" I squeezed her shoulder gently, looking up at the high ceiling of the courtroom, where the dim light seemed about to go out. "Because sometimes, to find the light, you have to go through a dark room first." Outside, the first thunder of the season rumbled, rattling the windows. I bowed my head and whispered, "Perhaps today's justice also needs to be awakened by thunder." The 10 minutes felt like a lifetime. When Judge Cole returned, I noticed a slight change in his gaze, calmer but also more cautious. He tapped the gavel gently, his voice now hoarse. "Session is resumed. Counsel for the plaintiff may present their case." Mr. Reynolds stood up, his voice resonant and clear, like someone used to winning. "Your Honor, my client, Mrs. Carla Anderson, requests the termination of her marriage to Mr. Michael Vance on justified grounds. He has suffered a serious injury, has lost his ability to work and to care for their child. Furthermore, the house where they both reside is marital property and must be divided equally. Sophie sat next to me, her little hands clasped, her gaze fixed on the judge's gavel. I felt her breathing tremble every time the lawyer mentioned the word father. I put my hand on her head, stroking her hair gently, as if to tell her that her grandfather was there and everything would be okay. Reynolds pulled out a blue file. We have a medical report demonstrating Mr. Michael Vance's unstable psychological state. According to the attending physician, the patient shows signs of depression, is prone to irritability, and is not in a condition to raise a child. The doctor's name, Frederick Gallo, a pawn of Marcus. I gripped my pen so hard the tip bent slightly. I stood up. That report has no legal validity, as the person who signed it has a direct relationship with one of the parties involved. Reynolds frowned. And who are you to claim that? I am the defendant's father, and I was also the one who taught law to the judge sitting up there. A murmur swept the room. Arthur tapped the gavel lightly for order. I stepped forward and presented every piece of evidence, every invoice, with clarity. My voice was firm, slow, and clear, the voice of someone who used to make an entire courtroom fall silent. This is the purchase contract for the house, 3 years before the marriage. Here are the bank withdrawal slips, the receipts for materials. Everything belongs to Michael Vance. Then I looked directly at Carla. As for your contribution, do you have any invoices to prove it? Or just the restaurant and hotel receipts that I can present right now? Carla turned pale. The silence in the room was so deep I could hear Sophie's breathing beside me. Arthur nodded. The defendant's evidence is accepted. The medical report will be reevaluated by an independent expert. I bowed my head in thanks and put my hand on Michael's shoulder. See, son, the truth doesn't need to shout. It just needs to be heard. Reynolds sat down, his face red. Carla gritted her teeth and whispered something to the strange man sitting in the back row. He stood up and left. I only caught half of his face. A cold look, the corner of his mouth curved in the smile of someone who has waited for the right moment. I recognized that look. Marcus Gallo. And in that instant, I knew. The trial was just the first step in a much larger battle. A battle against the darkness I thought I had buried 30 years ago. When the courtroom doors closed, I could still feel that cold stare. Marcus Gallo. That name dropped into my memory like an old rock falling from a cliff. 30 years had passed and he was still alive, walking the world with the air of someone who has never known a conscience. Michael sat next to me, tired but relieved. Dad, we won, right? I didn't answer right away. In my mind, fragments of memories flashed like pieces of broken glass. The Costello case, the nights I was followed, the envelope with the photograph of an 8-year-old boy. Not yet, son, I said quietly. There are battles that seem to end in the courtroom, but in reality, they're just beginning when you walk out. We returned home that night. Sophie was already asleep, her cheeks puffed out in a peaceful dream. I watched her for a long time and then closed the door gently. In the kitchen, Michael was sitting with a cup of tea. The yellow light cast on his face revealed a weariness mixed with hope. Dad, why did that man's face look so familiar? Because you met him once, but you don't remember. He was at your construction site. Michael looked up. Him? Carla's partner. Yes, Marcus Gallo, Costello's right-hand man all those years ago. I paused, closing my eyes for a moment. Son, maybe this whole thing with Carla wasn't just about greed. Maybe it was a chess game that was already set up. Michael was silent. I heard the wind blow through the window, a soft whistle as if someone was laughing outside. Night fell. I sat alone in my study and opened the old leather briefcase again. The dim yellow light from the lamp lit up the file titled Costello Case. The papers were yellowed, but every line of text was still as clear as if it were yesterday. I remembered. That year, I was the head judge in the case between Costello's wife and him. The woman came to court with her eyes swollen with fear, while Costello walked in with the smile of an untouchable man. I was determined to convict him, but just before the trial, I received the threat. Not just me, but my son was being watched, and it was Marcus Gallo who handed me the paper with Michael's picture. A wrong decision, Judge, and this boy disappears. I chose silence. I chose to leave the bench to save my son's life. But now, seeing him at Michael's trial, I understood. Silence was never a form of protection. It just prolonged the nightmare. The phone rang, shattering my thoughts. I picked up the receiver. The man's voice on the other side was deep and familiar. "Ernest, it's me, Richard. I need to see you tomorrow." "What's wrong?" "Gallo has surfaced publicly. I'm afraid he's not just here for the divorce." I was silent, listening to the heavy breathing on the other end. "What do you think he wants?" I asked. "What you never handed over," Richard replied. "The original Costello case file." I looked at the old leather briefcase, my fingers gently brushing the cold metal latch. My heart pounded. "Richard, I never gave it to anyone." "Then be careful, Ernest. He knows that, and he won't leave you alone." The call ended. I got up and turned off the light. In the darkness, I saw my reflection in the mirror, gray hair, tired eyes, and at my back, the shadow of the old hawk, the hawk of justice, who had just spread his wings again. Outside, the night wind blew hard, bringing a soft tapping sound to the door. A faint sound, but one that let me know the past had arrived on my doorstep. This time, not to warn, but to collect a debt. The next morning, while Michael was still practicing walking in the yard, I received an envelope with no return address, just my name written in familiar slanted handwriting. I opened it. Inside was a photograph of our own house, taken from across the street. On the edge of the photo, a sentence scribbled in red pen. "Thinking of playing with fire again, Judge Vance." I felt my hands tremble, but not from fear, from anger. After 30 years, Gallo was still using the same old trick: fear for one's family. I folded the photo and put it in my jacket pocket without Michael seeing it. That afternoon, I met Richard at a small cafe downtown. He had aged a lot, with gray hair and dark circles under his eyes, but his smile was still as sincere as ever. "I knew you'd come, Ernest," Richard said quietly. "Gallo isn't just back, he has money and backing. Costello's old network is now scattered throughout government agencies." "You mean he still controls the system?" "More than that," Richard replied. "He's trying to erase everything left of the Costello case, and you, Ernest, are the last one who still has the proof." I fell silent. A light breeze came through the cafe door, bringing the sound of a newspaper vendor. "Corruption, illegal construction on the outskirts." It sounded like an echo from the past. Richard looked around. Then he leaned in and whispered, "Do you still have the original files?" I nodded. "In the old briefcase, still at home." "Make backups, then give them to me. I have someone at the FBI. They're reopening the Costello network. If the evidence gets to them, Gallo will be exposed." "And if he finds them first?" Richard squeezed my shoulder. "Then you have to be prepared. I don't want to see another case like 93. In the afternoon, I returned home and found the front door slightly ajar. My heart pounded. I went inside. Everything was in its place, except for the leather briefcase, which had been taken from the closet and placed in the center of the table. On top, a blank sheet of paper with a hasty note, "Old man, I'm not playing this time." Michael came out from the back, his face pale. "Dad, I'm sorry. Someone came looking for you. Said he was an old friend. I didn't expect it." I put my arm around my son's shoulders and said quietly, "It's okay. He just wants us to know he can get into the house whenever he wants." That night, I locked all the doors and had Sophie sleep in my room. She held my hand and asked with an innocent voice, "Grandpa, why are you so worried?" I smiled. "Because I did the right thing once, and sometimes doing the right thing makes people angry." When the girl fell asleep, I turned on the computer and plugged in an old USB drive. The files appeared. A series of audio recordings, photos, contracts with Costello's forged signature. Everything was intact. I made 2 more copies. I saved them to a hard drive and sent an anonymous compressed file to a secure address. Then I sat in silence, listening to the wind whistle outside the window. Suddenly, I remembered an old saying of Lucy's. "Justice isn't a light, Ernest. It's a flame, and whoever holds it has to endure the burns." I nodded silently. That flame was still here. And tonight, I knew I would walk back into the darkness to keep it from going out. The next morning, I got a call from Richard. His voice was hoarse and rushed, as if he was looking over his shoulder. Ernest, I've contacted the people at the FBI. They want to see you tonight. At the Continental Hotel, room 512. Go alone. Don't tell anyone. Are you sure it's a safe place? They chose the spot, not me. But believe me, if you still have the evidence, tonight is the only chance we have to bring it to light. I hung up the phone and looked out at the porch. The sky was gray and heavy, and a cold wind swept through the small garden where Sophie was chasing her cat. I knew I couldn't leave the girl and Michael alone while Gallo's ghost was lurking. In the afternoon, I told Michael I had to go out and see Richard to discuss some papers for the house. He wanted to come with me, but I stopped him. No, son. Today I need to go alone. Michael looked at me, doubt in his eyes, but then he nodded slightly. Be careful, Dad. Before I left, I opened the closet, took out my wooden gavel, and gently stroked the old surface. I always carried it with me, as a reminder. Justice must never be forgotten. The drive to the hotel was quieter than usual. The city, as night falls, takes on a different look, peaceful, but with a latent danger. I arrived at the Continental 15 minutes before the agreed-upon time. The receptionist pointed me the way. I went up to the 5th floor and walked down a long, red-carpeted hallway. Room 512 was at the end. The door was slightly ajar. I knocked twice. No one answered. Richard? I called out softly. No response. I pushed the door gently. The inside was dark, lit only by the dim light of a table lamp. The air was cold. And then I saw him. Richard, lying on the floor, the carpet stained with blood, his eyes open and lifeless. I froze, my heart pounding. My legs were shaking, but my mind was strangely clear. I knelt down and touched his neck. He was cold, a clean cut across his throat, no sign of a struggle. It had been done quickly, professionally. Poor you, Richard, I whispered. A slight noise sounded behind me. I turned around. From the bathroom, a figure emerged. Marcus Gallo. He looked the same as in my memories, gray hair slicked back, an impeccable black suit, and the cold smile of someone who believes he always has the upper hand. Long time no see, Hawk. I thought you had died with Costello. He died, but his empire didn't. I'm the heir. He stepped closer, his voice soft as a poisonous wind. You still have that file, don't you? Give it to me, and you and your family can live in peace, I answered, my voice hoarse but firm. And if I don't, then I'll do what you feared most 30 years ago. I'll start over with your son. I tried to stay calm, taking half a step back. Richard's death made me understand he wasn't bluffing. I glanced quickly to the side. The hotel room door was still open. A single chance. As he reached into my jacket pocket, I shoved him hard. He staggered, and the phone in his hand fell. I kicked it away and ran for the door, but Gallo grabbed my arm, holding me tight. Don't forget, I didn't come alone. Footsteps were heard in the hallway. I thought it was all over when I heard a familiar voice. Let go of my father. Michael. He was there, leaning on his crutches, and behind him was Judge Arthur Cole. Gallo froze. Arthur? You're betraying me too? Arthur stepped forward, his voice calm but firm. Maybe it's time for real justice to speak. Outside, police sirens were getting closer. I exhaled slowly. The battle had begun, and this time, I was no longer fighting alone. The scene in room 512 turned chaotic. The police sirens echoed in the hallway, accompanied by the sound of hurried footsteps. Gallo, realizing he was trapped, shoved me hard, making me fall, and ran for the emergency exit. Arthur shouted, Stop him! 2 police officers managed to get in, but he had already disappeared into the darkness of the stairwell. All that remained was the smell of blood and a thick air of fear and rage. Michael helped me up. His hands were shaking, but he was trying to stay calm. Are you okay, Dad? I nodded slightly. Beside me, Arthur knelt to examine Richard's body, and then, silently, closed our friend's eyes. Richard died believing that justice still had value, he said quietly, and I owe him my life. I looked at Arthur for a long time. 30 years ago. You were the one who signed the decision to dismiss the Costello case, weren't you? Arthur was silent. The answer was in his lowered, moist gaze. I was young, stupid, and scared, he whispered. Costello and Gallo had bribed everyone. I thought I could live in peace with that lie, but I couldn't. The day I saw you in my courtroom, I knew God was giving me a second chance. A group of police officers entered and guided us out. They collected the evidence and cordoned off the crime scene. As we walked down the long, yellow-lit hallway, I suddenly felt my own exhaustion, but also a sense of relief after 30 years of oppression. At the city police station, I spent hours giving my statement. Everything inside me seemed to drain away, the fear, the anger, even the old pains. I told the whole story, from the Costello case to Gallo's appearance in the courtroom. The detective listened, taking notes from time to time, his eyes widening with every detail. When I finished, he leaned back in his chair, thoughtful. "Mr. Vance, what you've provided isn't just evidence for one case. It's the key to a network that's existed for 3 decades. We're transferring this entire file to the FBI. You and your family will be protected." Michael sat beside me, his hand on my shoulder. His look was a mixture of worry and pride. "Dad, I don't know whether to thank you or be angry with you." I smiled slightly. "Son, sometimes justice is late, but it never forgets the way." When we left the station, it was dawning. The early light tinted the old rooftops gold. Arthur was waiting for us on the steps, his vest stained with dried blood. "Ernest, I've turned myself in. I want to cooperate, to end all of this." I nodded. "This time, you chose correctly." Michael drove me home. Sophie ran out and hugged my legs, her eyes wide. "Grandpa, why were you so late?" I knelt down and hugged her tightly. "Because I went to help a friend out of the darkness, my girl." "And did you win?" I looked at Michael, and then I smiled. Nobody wins. But justice just woke up from a long sleep. That afternoon, a strong wind blew across the front porch. I looked out at the bustling city, which seemed to an unknowing of the secrets buried beneath it. In my hand, the small wooden gavel felt a little heavier, like a reminder that justice had returned. And this time, it would no longer be silent. The news of the hotel shooting spread throughout the city in hours. The main newspapers ran red headlines. "Former Judge Ernest Vance breaks 30 years of silence, delivers evidence of Costello corruption ring." My home phone didn't stop ringing. Journalists, police, old colleagues, everyone wanted to hear me speak. But I said nothing. I had already said enough with my actions. Michael read the news on his screen, his eyes fixed on the lines that bore my name. "Dad, the whole country is talking about you." I took a sip of coffee, my voice calm. "I don't need to be famous. I just need justice to be remembered." "But you've gotten your honor back." I looked at my son and smiled. "No, Michael, I've just gotten my peace of mind back. Honor isn't in what other people say. It's in being able to look at yourself in the mirror without looking away." The next day, the FBI invited me to give more statements. As I entered the building, I saw Arthur Cole sitting in the waiting room, his face drawn, but his gaze relieved. He stood up when he saw me. "Ernest, I've confessed everything. The times I took money, the fixed trials, even that Costello bribed me to silence you. I don't expect to be forgiven. I just hope to help you finish what you started." I put my hand on his shoulder. "Forgiveness isn't forgetting, Arthur. It's daring to look back without running. You've done what you failed to do 30 years ago. That's enough. The investigative agency informed me that Marcus Gallo was being hunted nationwide. His accounts had been frozen, and many politicians who were involved with Costello were being arrested one by one. When I signed the last report, the investigator told me quietly, "You know, we call you the hawk that flew again." I just smiled faintly. A hawk doesn't fly to be admired. It flies to protect its nest. In the afternoon, I returned home and sat with Michael on the porch, watching Sophie chase the dog in the yard. The evening light spread over the old brick wall, as golden as a warm coat of paint. Michael said quietly, "Dad, I used to think you were afraid of powerful people, afraid of the past. Now I understand. You were just afraid of losing me." I looked at him, my eyes full of love. A father can lose everything as long as his son is still breathing. But my son, justice is like breathing. If you hold it in too long, you're the one who dies first. At night, I went out onto the balcony. The wind blew through the orchids, bringing back the soft scent of past nights. I took the wooden gavel from the drawer and placed it on the table. It was no longer a symbol of power, but of memory, perseverance, and honesty. The phone rang. The voice on the other end was a police chief. "Mr. Vance, Marcus Gallo has been arrested while trying to leave the country on a false passport." I closed my eyes and took a deep breath. The night wind brushed my aging face, bringing with it the soft scent of the approaching dawn. Lucy used to say, "A day will come when you won't need to strike the gavel, because justice will resonate on its own in the hearts of those who have suffered." I slowly looked up at the sky. There, in the silent darkness, I thought I heard the beating wings of an old hawk returning to its sky. 3 months after Gallo's arrest, our house settled back into peace. In the early morning, sunlight filtered through the window frame, illuminating the pots of orchids that Sophie tended to every day. Michael could now take short steps without crutches, slow but steady. I thought all the bad things were over, but justice, like the past, always finds a way to knock on the door again, usually when you've barely had time to catch your breath. That morning, while I was making coffee, there was a knock at the door, a weak, hesitant knock. I opened the door, and the person standing there made the coffee cup in my hand tremble slightly. Carla. She was much thinner, her face pale, her hair disheveled, a far cry from the image of the woman who once walked out of my house with a cold, arrogant smile. "Mr. Vance, I'm sorry to come unannounced. I need to talk." Michael came out and froze when he saw his ex-wife. Their eyes met, one full of old anger, the other of late regret. "What are you doing here?" Michael asked, his voice hoarse. "If you've come to make excuses, save it." Carla looked down, wringing her hands. "No, I've come to tell the truth, what I should have said a long time ago." I stayed silent and motioned for her to sit down. The small room fell into a silence broken only by the ticking of the clock. Carla opened her purse, took out a thick envelope, and placed it on the table. "This is what was left in Gallo's apartment. He hid it in his safe. When the police came, I managed to grab it." I opened it. They were old photos, taken before Michael's accident, pictures of scaffolding, of the work site, familiar faces of workers, and a paper with a red stamp. "Payment confirmed, Project A71. The sentence scribbled underneath made my blood run cold. Failure on 4th floor scaffold. Accident must happen by Friday. Michael was paralyzed. "My God, you mean..." Carla broke down crying. "Your accident. It wasn't an accident. Gallo ordered it. He wanted you crippled so he could manipulate me more easily. To use me to get close to you, Mr. Vance. He told me to help him get this house in exchange for money and a new career. I was so stupid, I believed him." Michael collapsed into the chair, covering his face with his hands. I looked at Carla, my heart heavy as lead. "Do you know how much you destroyed? Not just a man, but a little girl's trust. The peace I worked so hard to maintain." Carla nodded, tears falling nonstop. "I know, and I don't expect you to forgive me. I've already reported everything to the FBI. They say they're reopening the investigation into the accident. I wanted to tell you two first, so Sophie will know, in the future, what her mother did." She stood up and bowed her head slightly. Michael followed her silently with his gaze. When Carla reached the door, I called out. "Carla," she turned, her eyes wet. "Thank you for telling the truth. It doesn't erase the guilt, but at least it's the start of something, right?" She nodded and walked away down the small path, her small figure gradually disappearing in the dim morning light. Michael sat down next to me. His hands were still shaking. "Dad, I don't know whether to hate her or feel sorry for her." I put my hand on my son's shoulder. "Don't hate her, Michael, because hate keeps us in the dark. Forgiveness isn't forgetting. It's daring to keep living without carrying chains." Outside in the yard, Sophie was laughing as she ran around the old oak tree. Her laughter echoed in the sunlight, as clear as if there had never been a wound in the world. I watched her and said quietly to myself, "Perhaps justice isn't just about judging. Sometimes it's having the courage to forgive." The rain that night came suddenly, falling on the old roof of the house like a sad symphony. I sat on the porch, my sweater half damp, watching the raindrops run down the railing. Michael was sitting next to me, his gaze thoughtful. We didn't say anything for a long time. Each of us was trying to reorder the fragments of memory that Carla had just shattered. "Dad," Michael finally said, "all this time I thought I was just the victim of an accident, of negligence. Now I understand. There are people willing to turn misfortune into a tool." I nodded slowly. "You know, what hurts the most isn't that they harm us. It's that they believe they have the right to." I poured a hot cup of tea for both of us. The steam rose, mixing with the damp smell of the rain. It reminded me of the distant nights when Lucy was still alive. She used to say, "Only the rain knows how dry the earth has been." The next morning, the FBI came to the house. They brought a document requesting an additional statement regarding a conspiracy to cause an intentional accident. I read every line carefully and then signed. One of them said, "Mrs. Anderson has been fully cooperative. The evidence she provided matches her data. Gallo will also be charged with attempted aggravated assault." I just nodded. I felt no satisfaction, only a weariness like that of a climber who has just reached the summit and looks back at the abyss he has overcome. When the agents left, Sophie ran to me and tugged on my hand. "Grandpa, is Mom coming back?" I knelt down and looked directly into her clear eyes. "Your mom will be back, but not today. She has things to do to be a better person. And when she's done, will we forgive her, Grandpa?" That question took my breath away. I stroked her hair. "Forgiveness is something we do for our own hearts, not for others. If you still love your mom, then you've already forgiven her." That afternoon, Michael came out onto the porch, his new wooden cane in hand. He walked with slow steps, steadier than ever. "I just spoke with the federal prosecutor," he said. "They say Gallo's case could drag on, but I want to finish what's mine. I want to rebuild my small workshop. I want to get back to work, Dad." I smiled, a quiet pride growing inside me. Good. Work is the best way to get back up. Justice wins in court. But life is only won when you don't give up. We stood in silence, watching Sophie dance in the lingering puddles, her dress stained with mud but still radiant. The rain seemed to be washing away what was left. The anger, the fear, even the past. I turned to Michael and said quietly, "See? After the storm, the earth is softer. The plants grow more easily. It's the same with people." Michael looked at me, a tired but sincere smile on his face. "Dad, I think I understand now why they call you the Hawk of Justice. It's not because you always win. It's because you never stop flying." I chuckled. Outside, the sky was beginning to clear. The smell of wet earth and sunlight mixed, like a promise that all suffering would eventually turn into new life. A week later, I was summoned to the FBI headquarters to sign my final statement. Inside the building, the atmosphere was tense but orderly. The white light reflected off the metal tables, reminding me of the trials of old, where people sought not only truth, but sometimes redemption. A young officer guided me to a meeting room. 2 people were already waiting at the table. Captain Sarah Jennings, head of the Marcus Gallo investigation, and a quiet-looking man who introduced himself as Agent Miller, representing the FBI's collaborative team. Jennings opened the file and said slowly, "Mr. Vance, your testimony and evidence, along with the documents Mrs. Anderson provided, have helped us trace the entire network. Gallo is not only guilty of corruption and conspiracy, but he was also running a transnational money laundering system." Miller nodded, adding, "You know, we call you the missing piece. Without you, this case would have stayed buried for another 10 years. I just smiled faintly. "I'm not looking for glory. I just want to know that this time, justice can truly stand on its own." Jennings slid an envelope over to me. Inside was a copy of the formal indictment and a provisional sentencing order. Marcus Gallo, 30 years in prison, for the crimes of conspiracy, bribery, corruption, conspiracy for workplace sabotage, and aggravated assault against Michael Vance. "He won't be getting out of this prison," Jennings said firmly, "and we will demand a public trial so everyone can see that no one is above the law." I nodded. The heaviness in my chest finally lifted. "Thank you, Captain. 30 years ago, I lost faith in this profession. Today, you've made me believe again. When I left the headquarters, the sun was shining brightly. Outside, at the entrance, Michael and Sophie were waiting. Seeing me, the girl ran over, holding up a newspaper. "Grandpa, you're in the paper again!" The hawk of justice helped dismantle the country's largest corruption network. I laughed and stroked my granddaughter's head. "I just did what I had to do, sweetheart." Michael took my hand, his voice deep. "I'm proud of you, Dad." I squeezed his hand. "No, son, I'm proud of you, because you stood up after everything." That afternoon, we stopped by the cemetery. I placed a bouquet of fresh flowers on Lucy's grave and whispered, "You see, my dear, I've kept my promise. I've protected this family, and I've kept justice from dying." A soft breeze passed, bringing with it the scent of jasmine and the rustle of leaves, like an answer. As we left, I watched Michael helping Sophie walk in the evening light. Their two shadows stretched out on the red brick path, one tall and one small, merging like an image of the future. I understood that justice isn't the end of a sentence, it's the beginning of a new life. Before reaching the gate, I turned and looked at the sky. Against the pale blue background, a hawk spread its wings wide, flew slowly, and then disappeared toward the sunset. I smiled and said quietly, "Fly, hawk." The sky of justice has opened up again. That summer, the city seemed rejuvenated after the long rain. Everything felt like it was starting over. The construction site where Michael used to work resumed with new safety standards. Sophie was about to start a new school year, and I, for the first time in many years, could sit in silence without feeling a burden in my heart, just the soft breeze of a duty fulfilled. One morning, Michael came into the house with a paper in his hand. His gait was almost steady now. "Dad, I've been rehired at the company. They want me to run the new workplace safety department." I looked at my son. His eyes were shining like they did in his youth, with a determination forged in pain. "They chose the right person," I said, "because no one understands the value of a human life like someone who once risked it." Michael smiled, a simple but resilient smile. I understand you better now, Dad. I used to be angry that you left your career. Now I know, you were just protecting what mattered most. Your silence wasn't cowardice, it was your greatest act of courage." In the afternoon, Sophie came running home from school with a drawing in her hand. She spread it out enthusiastically in front of me. "Grandpa, I drew you." On the paper, in innocent crayon strokes, was the figure of a gray-haired old man with large wings spread wide, and underneath, a scribbled sentence, "My grandpa, the hero with wings." I laughed, but a lump formed in my throat. "You drew me flying?" "Uh-huh. My teacher said that people who do the right thing have wings, and you fly higher than anyone in my class." Michael looked at me and smiled tenderly. "The girl's right, Dad. You're not just the hawk of justice. You're the one who taught me that justice isn't in the courthouses. It's in the way we live, in every brick we lay, and in every hand we help lift up." I was silent, running my hand over the drawing. Suddenly, I remembered Lucy, her gaze from so long ago, as sweet and clear as a June sky. I said quietly, partly to myself, partly to her, "I kept my promise, Lucy, not with a gavel, but by not bowing my head." At night, I took Sophie up to the roof to watch the moon. The city below glittered with lights. The girl sat on my lap and asked, "Grandpa, aren't you afraid your wings will get tired from flying so much?" I smiled. "Everyone gets tired, sweetheart. But the important thing is that when you fall, there's someone waiting below to catch you." Michael came out of the house and placed a newly made wooden box on the table. "I made this for you, Dad." I opened it. Inside was the old wooden gavel, but restored, polished with a new inscription. "Justice lives in us." I looked at my son, unable to say anything. A tear fell, mixing with the silvery moonlight. Sophie hugged my neck and whispered, "Grandpa, you're still flying higher than anyone, right?" I kissed her forehead. "Yes, I'll fly, but not alone. Because when people live right, even the earth knows how to lift them up." High above, the night wind blew, carrying the sound of wings mixed with the moonlight. I closed my eyes, letting my soul feel as light as a hawk, flying over the sleeping city toward the dawn that waited ahead. 6 months later, autumn returned. The whole city was bathed in the soft golden light of sunset. I walked slowly through the main plaza, where the city was holding a ceremony to honor those who had contributed to the national justice system. They sent me an invitation with the title, Symbol of Integrity and Popular Justice. When I arrived, I saw many people, journalists, officials, and young faces in lawyers' uniforms who looked at me with a mixture of respect and curiosity. They clapped as I went up on stage. A journalist held a microphone out to me. "Mr. Ernest Vance, could you say a few words for the new generation?" I looked around and saw Michael, Sophie, and hundreds of expectant eyes in the crowd. I smiled and said slowly, "Young people, don't be afraid to stand alone for what is right. Justice doesn't need shouting. It needs someone with the courage to be silent without bowing their head." It took me 30 years to understand that justice isn't in the papers or the medals. It's in how we treat the weakest among us, and in the peace we find at the end of the day. The applause was long. An official came up and handed me a Medal of Honor. I accepted it, but just bowed my head slightly, saying no more. For me, the greatest reward wasn't a medal. It was seeing my son and granddaughter smile in peace. When the ceremony ended, I left quietly before the crowd. Walking down the old street where Lucy and I used to stroll, the smell of fresh bread from the corner bakery, the sound of a guitar from a small cafe, it all made my heart feel light. A young man approached me and said, "Thank you, Judge. You reminded us what it means to fight." I just nodded, moved. I got home after dark. Michael was reading a book. Sophie was asleep on the sofa, hugging her kitten. Seeing me, she shouted with joy, "Grandpa, you were on TV! They called you the hawk that never stopped flying." I laughed and sat down next to her. "You know, people keep saying I fly high, but in reality, I just learned not to be afraid of falling." Michael poured me a cup of tea. "Dad, are you thinking of going back to work now? They've offered you a judicial advisory position. I read it online." I shook my head, my gaze lost on the porch, where the moonlight spilled over the orchid garden. "I've flown enough. Now it's time to teach others how to care for their own wings." I opened the drawer and took out the old wooden gavel, the symbol that had been with me my whole life. It shone now with the inscription Michael had added, "Justice lives in us." I placed it on the shelf between Lucy's photo and Sophie's drawing. "Here," I said, "this is where justice should be, between the past and the future." Sophie looked up. "Grandpa, does justice get tired?" I smiled and stroked her hair. "Yes, but it never sleeps. It just changes guardian, my girl." Outside, a soft breeze was blowing. I went out to the porch and looked at the night sky. A large bird glided through the moonlight. A hawk, or perhaps just an illusion of memory. "Whatever it was," I said quietly, "fly on, hawk. Justice has found its wind." I sat down, closed my eyes, and listened to the wind mix with the breath of the night. Deep inside, I saw Lucy smiling, and I understood that my story had come to an end, not with the strike of a gavel, but with the peace of a soul that has done its duty. If this story captivated you, like the video, subscribe to the channel, and share your thoughts in the comments. To hear the next story, click the box on the left of the screen. Thanks for watching. Courtroom.